True Crime Conversations acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast was recorded on. Saturday, November 12, 2022, is a big day in Moscow, Idaho, a small town near the Washington state border. It's game day. And even though the University of Idaho football team, the Vandals, aren't exactly on a winning streak, the town still gets whipped into a frenzy when they take to the field. At 11:30 a.m, Xana Kernodle, a junior at the university studying marketing, starts to send out texts to her friendship group, getting them G'd up for the day ahead. She knows her childhood bestie Emily won't make it. She works at the football ground, so she'll already be there helping the team behind the scenes. Xana lives at 1122 King Road with 4 roommates, Dylan, Bethany, Kaylee and Maddie. They're a tight group, living in an area with friends all around them. Emily, who we mentioned before, is close by, and Xana's boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, has regular sleepovers. By midday, the crew has assembled, including Ethan's triplet brother, Hunter Chapin, their friends Josie, Peter, Lyndon, and Hunter Johnson, Emily's boyfriend and Ethan's best mate. They spend the next few hours drinking and moving between the residences of the area, before Ethan and Hunter Chapin head off to their triplet sisters' formal. Afterwards, they meet up with Xana at their fraternity house party. He texts his best mate Hunter and asks him to join them, but he says Emily's fallen asleep after her big day working at the football. By midnight, Kaylee and Maddie are partying at a little club in town. It's always packed on game day. But Kaylee, who has not long broken up with her childhood sweetheart Jack, admits to Adam the barman and Jack's good friend that she may have made a mistake. Just before 1:30 a.m, the girls head home via a food truck, ordering a carbonara mac and cheese to share. They text a designated sober driver to come pick them up, and they head back to King Road. When they get there, Dylan's in her room recovering from her big day of drinking. Bethany is already asleep in her basement room. Xana and Ethan arrive back at the house just after 2 a.m. They chat to Kaylee and Maddie in the lounge room before both head up to bed. The girls hang out on the couch a little longer, talking about Jack. They text and call him, but he doesn't answer. They don't see the white car that's been passing by their house again and again as they'd all arrived back home. At 3 a.m, Xana's in her room and hungry. She orders DoorDash, which arrives at around 4. Sometime after that, Dylan is drifting in and out of her post-game day drinking sleep when she thinks she hears one of her roommates say, "There's someone here." Now, this King Road house is known to have frequent guests. They host a lot of get-togethers, so it's not unusual. But the voice she heard didn't sound right. So she gets up and cracks her door just a little. There's nothing there, so she goes back to bed. But just as she does, she hears someone crying. Is that Xana? Again, she opens the door just a fraction. She hears another voice. This one's not familiar. A man who says, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." There's a noise, a loud thud, and her roommate Kaylee's dog Murphy starts to bark, which is very unusual for him. Dylan quickly shuts her door again, wondering if she's going crazy. What is going on out there? It's quiet then, so Dylan cracks her door for a third time, and that's when she sees him. The man with the bushy eyebrows. He's wearing a mask. Is he a firefighter? He's holding something. It looks like a vacuum. They make eye contact before Dylan quickly shuts her door again, reaching for her taser before realising it's got no battery. She doesn't know it then, but reaching for her taser was the right move, even if she doesn't know what exactly the man has done to the other residents of 1122 King Road. I'm Claire Murphy, and this is True Crime Conversations, a podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. When Dylan saw that man in her house, she rightfully panicked. She texts Bethany in her room below. Bethany tells her to race down and join her. The pair convinced each other that, yeah, okay, it was all a bit crazy. After all, Bethany hadn't heard a thing. Scared and exhausted, the two girls fell asleep. By the next day, though, when the roommates upstairs still aren't answering their phones, Dylan starts to freak out in earnest. Now, she speaks to Xana's bestie, Emily, who lives nearby, asking her to please come over and help them look. Emily jokes about bringing pepper spray, but she and her boyfriend Hunter come over to check anyway. Hunter goes inside and heads upstairs. He sees that the door to Xana's room is slightly ajar. He pushes it open further and sees Xana lying on the floor. It looks like she's fallen back, face up. His best friend Ethan is lying on the bed, on his side, facing the wall. There's so much blood. They've been stabbed multiple times. Hunter doesn't realise that Kaylee and Maddie have also been killed. He backs out of the house, tells Emily not to go into her best friend's room and to call the police. For 6 weeks, the local police, working alongside the FBI and state police, would unravel what happened to the Idaho 4, leading to the arrest of 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger, a doctoral student at Washington State University studying criminology. But while they got the who, they have never got the why. Vicky Ward is the co-author of the book The Idaho 4, An American Tragedy, spending months speaking to the people who knew not just those 4 innocent students, but the man accused of killing them, piecing together all their stories so we can better understand why. She joins us now. Vicky, thank you so much for joining us today. I can't imagine the amount of man time that has gone into piecing all of this information together. It must have been quite a feat.
It was a lot of time, a lot of hours obviously spent in Moscow, where the murders happened, and in Pullman, the 10-minute drive away where Washington State University is and where Bryan Kohberger lived. I mean, I think the book is about 2 towns in a way and the relationship there. Obviously, I spent a lot of time in Idaho more broadly. This is a strange thing to say because this is a tragedy. This is a book about a terrible, terrible tragedy. And it's about the worst of humanity, but it's also about the best of humanity. It's certainly not a book that glorifies the murderer, I hope. It's called The Idaho 4. It is about the victims, but it's meant to be emotional. You're meant to feel like you're there in Moscow on the night of the murders. You're meant to feel what it was like to be their families, what it was like to be their friends, what it was like to be the police chief, suddenly coping with this in the glare of the media, what it was like to be a local journalist. You know, you're meant to feel involved and you're meant to understand that when something like this happens, there is a massive ripple effect and that the community of Moscow is never going to be the same. There was, great relief among many people I spoke to that Bryan Kohberger was not from there. He wasn't one of them. But nonetheless, it has torn that town apart. I think I quote young student Lexi Pattinson, saying, we'll never quite be the same again.
Well, can you take us to Moscow? Because it is a relatively small town. It's a border town, essentially. But it has a university and it is often filled with students who are, well known for partying and having a good time. But what's the general community of Moscow like? What's it like to be there in that town?
So it's an incredibly picturesque small town. And it's really, really small. I mean, that was the thing that I had to get used to. I would stay at the Best Western Hotel and someone said to me, well, that's a little out of town. Well, I mean, it's a 5-minute drive from anywhere. And, I would get in my car expecting to sort of travel great distances. And I would be, just be 2 minutes from the next interview. Moscow is interesting because it's a liberal college town. Back in the 1970s, it was kind of known as, it had a very big LGBTQ community. Now, there is a division in the town, and that comes into play in the book. There is a conservative church in Moscow called Christ Church that has about 4,000 members. And it has its own school, its own university, its own cafes and bars, its own bookstore. And it's very wealthy, this church. It's buying up a lot of Main Street. And its stated mission is to evangelize the town. And the members of the church are all very blonde and white and preppy looking. And, in some ways, the community sort of likes the optics of that, but there are things about the church that, this is a liberal town. The church is quite conservative. It has quite conservative views about women. And the church also refused to wear masks during COVID. And so there were some arrests, including of the two grandchildren of the head of the church. And lawsuits were flying at the time of the murders. And the book sort of does get into how those simmering tensions got way worse because of the murders. The murders were almost weaponized. It was quite helpful for the church that the image of the police was a little bit tarnished during the 6 weeks when it looked like they couldn't find whoever had done this.
You conducted hundreds of interviews in order to piece this book together, and you can tell just from the sheer detail that you get into when you are essentially following the 4 victims in their final months. And we understand so much more about their relationships, not just to each other, but to their friendship in the wider university group. And we also get to understand, as you mentioned, the police chief, all of his employees, and the extended sort of town members, and then the parents. So the circle widens and widens and widens. So out of these hundreds of interviews and all those conversations that you had, what do you feel were the most significant revelations that they shared with you, regardless of where that came from? Because you did speak to so many people to pull this book together.
Well, I think I was very stunned to really understand what it was like to be Hunter Johnson the day after the murders. Ethan Chapin's best friend, the boyfriend of Xana's best friend. This young couple is called over to the house by the surviving roommates who don't understand what they've seen the night before, but have this feeling of foreboding. And they walk over to the house, not really thinking that anything that serious can have happened. Emily, Xana's best friend, when she gets the call from Dylan Mortensen, the roommate, sort of says, ha, shall I bring my pepper spray? She thinks, it's not that unusual for Dylan Mortensen to have seen something, had some crazy dream or hallucination after a big partying night. And it had been a big football game day on the campus of the University of Idaho. But when Hunter Johnson then goes into that house, goes up the stairs and opens Xana Kernodle's bedroom door, and he sees Xana lying on the floor and pools of blood, and he sees Ethan Chapin, her boyfriend, lying in the bed and obviously dead. None of us know what we would do in a situation like that. But this young man's first reaction is to stop his girlfriend, Emily, who's coming up the stairs behind him, from coming any further, and to stop the others who are outside the house from coming in. And his first instinct is to protect them and make sure they do not see what he has just seen. And then he tells them to call 911 and protects them from what he already knows, which is that they're dead. He says there's an unconscious person. Tell them there's an unconscious person. Having done that, he then goes into the kitchen, gets a kitchen knife, goes back into the bedroom and opens, checks the pulses of his friends, but opens all the closet, just trying to see if the murderer is still there. And, which is also an extraordinary, brave thing to do. And, I got to know Hunter Johnson, and I got to know his girlfriend, Emily Allant, very well. And, they're just great kids who this horrible, horrible thing happened to. And I think, sort of really hearing the story from their eyes was very revealing. The absolute confusion when they arrested Brian Kohberger, and they look at Kohberger's picture and they're just completely mystified as to what on earth the connection could possibly be between their friends and this guy. And then their bravery in, Emily, is still terrified of the dark. Hunter Johnson, didn't speak for a few days, weeks after that thing. The trauma was so immense. And then on top of the whole thing, they were accused online of being the murderers. But even so, Emily refused to have, you can get this rapid eye movement therapy that is meant to help with trauma. But the downside of it is that if you have it and you then testify to a jury, a judge can rule that it can be ruled inadmissible because your brain has been effectively tampered with. So Emily refused to do it because she was determined that she was going to testify against Koberger. And now, obviously, I haven't spoken to her in a week or two. I hope she has gone and done it.
There were 2 other people in the house the night the 4 were murdered, Dylan and Beth. And for them, I imagine there must be, on top of the trauma of losing their friends, of them being potential victims because they were in the house at the time, and the fact that one of them even saw the man in the hallway that night but didn't understand what was going on and didn't piece together that terrible thing had happened literally in rooms just, mere meters away. What's the impact been on those 2? And as you mentioned too, like the online onslaught of, netizen detectives was really quite terrible for them, that you step through in the book that, their family and friends are trying to defend them from accusations that it's them who are the killers at the same time as they're trying to process this traumatic event that they've experienced. I can't imagine where their minds have been at for the past few years as they've tried to absorb everything that's happened.
Well, we've just had the sentencing this morning, and, we heard from a friend of Bethany's, we heard from both of them, from Bethany indirectly, and from, I thought Dylan Mortensen gave a very powerful impact statement. And to your point, you heard in a heart-wrenching way the guilt that they felt for surviving. And the awful, agonizing questioning, why do I get to live? And not being able to look at the victims' families without just feeling appalling through all of this. And, I hope that actually one of the things that the sentencing did accomplish this morning was to sort of put all the speculation about those 2 to rest. They're college kids who were being college kids. And it was a party house. The idea that there were people going in and out late at night, not so extraordinary. And it had been, a heavy partying day. Bethany Funk in the basement never saw or heard anything. And, you can see if you're, you've been asleep and, and you see somebody carrying a vacuum. It makes no sense. You would go, well, I must be hallucinating, which is exactly what Dylan Mortensen thought she was doing. Again, it's so human. That's one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, because it's just, it feels like we can all relate to it.
Something the book also gives us some insight into is the thinking of the police and the detectives who are working on this case, because it is a small town. They're a small police force. They don't have the resources available to them that the bigger cities would have. Not that they're inexperienced, but they aren't that experienced with a media storm that's going to follow an event like the deaths of 4 young people. And so we kind of get this understanding that they're trying to keep information quiet so that their investigation is not hampered by all of this publicity. But at the same time, we're in a very different world now by 2022, and the internet is going to be rife with speculation that they then have to counteract. How do you feel the police have actually handled this situation, considering everything they had to face in that moment?
Well, I think they did. I think James Fry would give them 10 out of 10 for actual police work. And he took great pride in the fact that you had, the FBI, the state police, and the police department working together seamlessly. There were no leaks. Nobody argued about, who was doing what. And at the end of the day, they got the right guy. But your point about the media is correct. And, he was very honest about the fact that all his years of training turned out, to be unhelpful in that, he'd been trained to protect the investigation, stay silent, not tip off the murderer who would be out there watching press conferences. But in the world that we live in, into that void comes all the speculation and sort of true crime nutter theories. And the police then have to waste their time clearing all sorts of people who had absolutely nothing to do with this. And worse, actually, the victims' families also are not getting enough information from the police. And they start to believe a lot of the stuff on the internet because they want to get involved in it because they're trying to protect the legacy of their dead children. And there's all this crap flying around about, are they in drugs, cartels? I mean, all sorts of crazy stuff. And so, James Fry, the police chief, learns the hard way that he has to take control of the narrative and he has to get coaching from the state police chief investment officer. And it's the one thing, if he had this all over again, that he would do differently. It's the way he would handle the media, and he would step up straight away and try and control the narrative.
There was a lot of gag orders around this case.
Well, that was very controversial.
Yeah, it must have made also writing this book very difficult for you too.
Right. Well, and so I do want to stress actually that you raise an important point, that the police chief did not break the gag order. What he did do that was very generous was he gave me his time and his insight into understanding who he is as a person, who he is as, how he led that department and what it was like emotionally for him going through that experience. But what he was very careful not to do was give me specifics about the investigation. I mean, having now spent a lot of time with James Fry, that's not who he is. He's a stand-up, great guy. It did make life difficult, but actually it also, one of the things that really shocked me was how in the dark the families were. I mean, it turned out they didn't know much more than I did. And I was kind of surprised to learn how few rights victims' families have in this country. And meanwhile, Koberger had all sorts of rights. He was allowed to wear a suit. He was allowed to push the trial back. He was allowed to move the trial. And I can see why the families' points of view on this diverged, why you had, three sets of parents, two sets at the end, frustrated with the plea deal and not having the death penalty still on the table and going through with it, and the others fine with it.
You're listening to True Crime Conversations with me, Claire Murphy. I'm speaking with Vicky Ward, investigative journalist and co-author of The Idaho 4, An American Tragedy, with James Patterson. Up next, Vicky tells us about how each of the parents of the Idaho 4 found out about their children's deaths and what followed. It's interesting too, you outline in the book how each of the parents of the 4 victims found out that their child was even a victim, because at the beginning, there was only this idea that Xana and Ethan were victims, and Kaylee and Maddie weren't even mentioned in the beginning. And there's this accounts in your book of these parents calling police and calling everybody they know and trying to figure out what has happened, knowing that there has been a homicide at their child's address. They know exactly that it's happened on King Street.
Yeah.
But they don't get any information for a really long time. And then Kaylee's sister even starts investigating herself and seems to get further than police even get in the initial stages.
Well, I don't know if you've seen the sentencing yet, but Olivia Gonzalez, Kaylee's older sister, is a powerful, impressive,
very smart
young woman, and she gave a powerful and impressive performance in court today. And I got a note from her father telling me how proud he was of her. And he's, one of actually the sort of subtexts of the book, but I've lived this a little bit, is seeing one of the silver linings of this awful thing is watching how Steve and Christy Gonzalez, Kaylee's parents, came, they already were in awe of their eldest daughter, but she really sort of in a way is like the super sleuth of the book. You're right. When she hears what's happened, she's in California with her husband. She's pregnant with her third kid. She's got 2 young, tiny kids. Everyone gets into that car and her husband drives through the night while she works her phones. She's got access to Kaylee's phone records. And, yes, she's way ahead of the police, talking to everyone that Kaylee and Maddie had spoken to in their last hours. She's finding the video of them at the grub truck the night before, getting their, carbonara. And you really feel it by the time when she walks into her parents' house and she sees, her parents shocked and devastated, and she just wants to help them and take charge. And her dismay when she discovers that they don't even have a point person yet at the Moscow Police Department. And she then finds it hard to find someone to give all this information she's gathered. You understand just from a human point of view how the frustration begins to build. And you're right, when you say that at the beginning it seems like Xana and Ethan, because Hunter Johnson, who finds them, never goes further. He doesn't go further upstairs in the house. They wait for the police to arrive. And then there's that heart sort of rending scene where the first cop who arrives is younger than Hunter Johnson. He's a 22-year-old. And when the police chief discovers that the first man in is the sort of the baby of the police force, his heart, he's like, oh my gosh, these young adults have just seen something they cannot unsee.
Without a public trial to rely on, how did you and your co-author go about verifying all this anecdotal evidence that you've collected together from all of these people that you've spoken to? Because, there's a lot of speculation involved in this. So how do you then verify all these facts? Well,
I think that the book is deliberately structured like a kaleidoscope. You move, as you just said, so we move from one person's point of view to another person's. So, you move when the murders happen. You have a scene from the point of view of the local journalist, who's the first journalist there. You have the point of view of the police chief. You have the point of view of the friends who've just found the bodies. You have the point of view of of then Stacey Chapin hearing, she's in the supermarket when she gets that awful call from her son, Hunter. And then you move to the living room of the Gonzalez family. And so in that sense, it is already true because what we're telling you is what it felt like to be those people. It's their experience that's being documented. So, I have a scene that I've been asked about, which is Emily, Xana's best friend. She has a dream. And in her dream, Koberger asks Maddie Mogan out in the vegan restaurant in Moscow, and she's waitressing and she turns him down. And that's the beginning of his obsession with her. That is Emily's dream. When she now tries to put it together, it's what she imagines happened. So I'm not asserting, and nor is James Patterson, we're not asserting that this is in fact what happened. This is what the best friend, this is their best guess. And that's what's in their head. So in that sense, I think that everything in the book is couched in that way. Do I know what was exactly in Brian Koberger's head? No, of course not. But do I know what it was like to be stuck in a car with him just weeks before the murder, as one of his classmates was? Yes, because his classmate goes into that scene in detail. And, what Koberger says about women and how he can have any women he wants. And, in that scene is, I think, very telling.
What surprised me when I started reading your book, and it was very much from the perspective of the Idaho Four, as we refer to them as. And you you get to understand what their campus life is like, what their home life is like, and who they are to each other. And, you sense the joy in them just being young people experiencing college life and sorority life. And then it feels very sudden, but you flip into Brian Koberger's world, which is actually quite shocking. I'd really love to get an understanding from you of what it was like to delve into his circle, to understand from the people who knew him what he was like.
Well, first I will tell you that where he grew up is the most bleak, depressing place I think I've ever been, and I've been stuck in the Arctic. There's nothing for kids to do. It's what they call a bedroom community. So it's sort of like the last point in terms of distance from New York, where people commute either into New Jersey or New York. And so you have a lot of kids growing up with basically parents gone most of the week, but there's nothing for these kids to do. It's very wooded. There's not even a bowling alley. I didn't see a movie theater. There's nothing, which is a reason that drugs run rampant in that part of the world. And as you know, I spent a lot of time with the mother of Brian Koberger's probably only real friend, who sadly passed away from a drug overdose in 2021, a guy called Jeremy Saba, who, unlike Brian Koberger, Jeremy Saba was popular and athletic and all, until he got addicted to heroin. But Connie, his mother, knew the Kobergers, knew the family, knew Brian about as well as anyone. They had lived next door for many years. The two kids had been friends, and she showed me where, Brian would come through the trees to come and hang out with Jeremy, and it was usually that way round. I mean, Jeremy was the magnet. Brian, the overweight, antisocial, quiet kid who barely spoke, was the one seeking Jeremy out. But there are scenes in the book that show Brian Koberger very early on becoming extremely manipulative, and also show him breaking in to the Saba's house and in a very deliberate, calculated, cold way. He phones this woman who's been nothing but kind to him because Jeremy's been arrested for the first time on possession of drugs. And he says, when are you going to visit Jeremy in prison, in jail? Because I'd like to come too. So she tells him, and he uses that window of time not to go to the jail, but to break in to the Saba house and steal from her. And, years later, when he's done some rehab, he suddenly appears in her kitchen to apologize, which is, she knows, is part of the rehab process. But you see there the beginning of the sort of manipulative, cold, calculated guy who's ready to break the law and who's obviously lacking in empathy. And I then, talked to friends of his. Well, no, he didn't have friends. People who were in his class as an undergraduate in DeSales. They called him the ghost because he would arrive with his coffee cup, stand there for 1 minute before class began, and then class would be over and he'd leave. Never any social interactions. But in those classes, he was exposed to the minds of serial killers and spree killers. I mean, that's what they were learning. And, definitely his classmates remembered being taught about this guy, Elliot Rodger, who was a young college student, bright but antisocial, was a virgin, couldn't get laid. He ends up in 2014 writing a manifesto and making a video saying, I'm now going to go out and kill all the sorority women who wouldn't sleep with me. And he sends this video to his therapist, who sends it to his mother 2 minutes before he goes out and kills 16 people before eventually turning the gun on himself. And this guy becomes a sort of cult hero of what they call the incel movement, involuntary celibates. And we know that Brian Koberger was exposed to all of that. We know that he got kicked out of a bar in Pennsylvania because he was behaving inappropriately with women. And we know that by the time he got to Washington State University, his views of women got him into trouble. And he couldn't keep his thoughts about women to himself. And whether it was in the classroom or out of the classroom, his actions and words jeopardized his teaching position there and his funding there. So by the time of the night of the murders, he's really got nothing to lose. He's blown everything. What should have been the apex of his career is now the bottom.
So he's basically telling people around him that women shouldn't bother getting an education, even though he's a teaching assistant to a professor marking their work. And he's delivering these big, long essays about how wrong they are about everything that they've written. And he's basically telling the only other man that he's really speaking to in that course that women have no position being educated. They should be homemakers and men should be the ones who are in charge, right?
That's exactly right. And worse, he says that he can walk into any social gathering and get and have any woman he wants, given that he was an antisocial guy who was not invited to social gatherings was hard to believe for the guy he was telling this to. I think you get a sense in the book of this guy spiraling down, and there's that terrible scene where his classmate looks at him and thinks that he's so palpably ill, mentally, physically, in every way. He looks like the Walking Dead, that he starts to type out this care form that ought to go anonymously to the administration, who would have hauled him in to check on him. And then this guy deletes it because he thinks there's something about Kohberger that's so odd that if he should ever find out who had sent this form in, there could be trouble for him. And, that it's a terrible, terrible irony because, a week later he goes out and commits the murders.
What details did you uncover about that week and the preparations that Kohberger was making in those moments before the actual murder? Do we know about his travels to Idaho University, which was not terribly far from his own university campus? Do we know what his movements and what his preparations were like in that time?
Well, so we know because it was in the probable cause affidavit that the police believed he was in the vicinity of the King Road house 12 times between August and the night of the murders. So, the deduction is that they think he was stalking, that he drove to Moscow 12 times and sat at the back of the house, and having followed his footsteps, as it were, and driven the way he would have driven and parked my car where he would have parked his car, you do have a direct view into what was Maddie Mogan's bedroom. That's really the only bedroom you could see actually properly into from the road.
And just the way she set her room up too, she was quite visible.
Yes, very.
In that room too, right? Because she'd kind of set up her vanity right there when she did her makeup and etc.
Exactly. Never dreaming that somebody, beyond the trees in the road was looking in on her. But having said that, her friends and neighbors, I quote this one young woman, neighbor Lexi Pattinson, would, walk past the house and see, and smile. She would walk to her car and every night and she would see Maddie through the window, lights blaring on. And it was it was a heartwarming sight to see her putting on her makeup and curling her hair. Nobody was thinking, evil was lurking, sort of stalking her. But what do we know about, what we don't know the minutiae of sort of like the 24 hours before. We do know there were reports that, lots of things were happening around the same time. One was the implosion of his job. Two, he was looking terrible. He was looking like he hadn't slept. We know from, we know this is more from what Dylan Mortensen saw and the lack of evidence that the police were able to find, that, he clearly had kitted himself out with a lot of precision and care. He had a mask and gloves. The only mistake he made was to leave the knife sheath with a tiny speck of DNA on the snap behind. And Dylan Mortensen that night saw him carrying what she described as a vacuum. And we just heard this morning in sentencing that he used something else other than a knife on Kaylee Gonzalez, that she woke up and that there was trauma, I think, to her face. And there was another instrument that had been used. But, he covered his traces very cleverly until the lab sent back, analyzed the DNA, and then using this investigative genetic genealogy reconstructed a family tree that then pointed them in the direction of Kohberger, because, he was the one who lived 10 minutes from the scene of the crime. They didn't have anything to put it together. His car, though they could see the car, they couldn't see the license plate because it had Pennsylvania. He didn't have a front plate because it still had Pennsylvania plates. So they couldn't get a clear ID of the car. And very cleverly, in the week after, he went into the local DMV and changed the plates. So, he had thought all of this through. And then on the night when, they were readying to do a dawn raid on his parents' family home, they still didn't have his DNA. They'd gone through the garbage. They had the dad's. But Kohberger, they'd seen him with gloves, carrying out the trash, putting his trash in his neighbor's trash. And, he knew what he was about. They didn't get to swab him and get his DNA until they actually arrested him.
So his studying of criminology taught him a lot about how to pull this off, right?
Yes, unquestionably. And that's why this is also difficult, because, again, we heard in sentencing today that, the judge really issued a warning to the media not to now go out and glorify this guy because he hasn't expressed the motive. There will be fascination as to what the motive was. And the danger is that if you give Kohberger the microphone, he takes back control of the story and you give him back all the power. It's a very difficult question. I feel really, really, really good about the Idaho 4 because the parents of the victims have told me that they're thrilled that the book exists because it's called the Idaho 4, but it is a tribute to their children and it means that we don't forget them.
Why did you choose to release this book now rather than wait until after maybe gag orders are lifted and we learn more and get more detail about these things? Why choose to do it before all of that potential information?
So when we set out to do this, potentially the trial was going to be that summer. We thought we were going to be late. That was actually our worry. We didn't control the timing of this. We just wrote the best book we could as quickly as we could. And it was a complete surprise to us. We never planned to come out before a trial. We sort of assumed we would be coming out after it. And then obviously this thing kept being pushed and pushed and pushed. And there's nothing in the book that broke any, we didn't, no one broke the gag order to speak to us. And there's nothing in there that was, that isn't in the public that anybody couldn't get. So what we were planning to do was then cover the trial and add extra chapters for the paperback. And I think the book is quite open about the fact that this is a moving story. It's a news story. And so, that's why, it wasn't like there was anything in the book that ought to have, that would have interfered with the course of justice.
Next, we unpack how this trial eventually unfolded. Well, can we talk about the trial then? Because it has been a fair roller coaster, starting from pleading not guilty to ending up pleading guilty in the end. And there's been a lot of conversation about what happened in between those two pleas and how the defence was planning to position Kohberger and who the other potential suspects they had in mind to put forward. What's your take on how this trial eventually unfolded?
He wanted to avoid the death penalty, and his counsel, they must have realised it was game over. They were out of options. I mean, yeah, you're right. There was all this, they went down the DNA route and they exhausted that as a line of defense, arguing that should have been inadmissible in court. They talked about an alibi, but there was no alibi, the credible alibi that came up. There was talk of the others. Who were they? I mean, at the end of the day, his defense attorney's job was probably to keep him alive, which is what she's done. What's my take on it? I totally understand why the families are divided about it. I totally understand why the Chapins, who I know very well, are like, okay, good, he's gone. We're just getting on with our lives. And I totally understand why the Gonzalez family feels like it's not good enough, and that they feel that the speed at which it happened robbed them of sort of having any ownership in this decision, that if they'd had longer to think about it, and the nature, Bill Thompson, the prosecutor, did try to explain, I think, in court why it had to happen so fast. And he understood that the Gonzalez were not happy with it and acknowledged that publicly. I think one of the things the book does do is highlight there are some real problems in the way that our system of justice runs.
Did any part of this investigation for you or your co-author make you reconsider your approach to crime reporting? This has been such a long process for you guys, so many interviews and trying to piece together everyone's movements and motivations. Does it make you stop and think about approaching another crime scene again?
Well, yeah, but my answer might surprise you. In a way, I would do another one again because what's different about this is it's really brought me closer to typically in a story you have sources, right? And you build trust with those sources, and you can have sources, I've been a journalist for a long time at this point, who you come back to again and again and again in your career. But the people in this book, it was, what happened was so traumatic and it was so emotional. And I went into it because my kids are the same age as the victims, and they were both in college at the same time. And my sons are twins. Ethan Chapin was a triplet. For me, this story was much more personal. It became much more personal than the books I normally write, which are about corruption and power systems and things like that. And in a way, because of that, I feel that this book matters so much more. And having now co-authored a book that I feel matters, I would, in some ways, I feel that out of a tragedy, some good. We do get to now have a book in which Xana, Ethan, Kaylee and Maddie won't be forgotten. And so would I do it again? Yes, I would, because you see the worst of humanity, but you also see the best.
Some of the book too does focus in on what life will be like in jail for Brian Kohberger, because he has been sentenced to 4 life sentences without parole. But you mentioned in the book that there would be some kind of kudos for another prisoner if they were to take him out, essentially. Yep. So he's probably going to exist in isolation from now until forever? Is that how it works?
That is a great question. You heard the Gonzalez family, that they're hoping he's absolutely not in isolation and that he goes in and gets thoroughly messed up on the inside. It's a possibility when people do what he's done. Life in prison can be not pretty. I guess now there are so many unanswered questions. We wait to see.
I think I wanted to end this conversation out of respect for the 4 young people who lost their lives. It is called the Idaho 4. I didn't want to end this talking about Brian Kohberger because you're right. Men like him that we've seen, and we can include, the Christchurch terrorist and, Elliot, who you mentioned earlier, these men who congregated initially on 4chan and who found communities that supported them in their views, and that led them to take the lives of other people. They should not be the spotlight at the end of all of this. So I would love you to tell me what you learned about Xana and Ethan and Maddie and Kaylee and the legacy that they leave behind, the impact that they've had on their friends and the support that those people now find in each other.
Well, these were 4 beautiful young adults on the cusp of everything, full of promise and I think that the book really brings alive their different personalities. Kaylee was the go-getter, hustler, independent young woman, very much loved her childhood boyfriend, but wanted freedom, wanted to go do stuff by herself first, and was literally on the point of doing that, had already left the campus, was about to graduate. Maddie, her best friend, an only child, Angel, Angel and her family absolutely loved. She had found Jake, the guy she thought she was going to be her forever person. He'd already graduated. They were planning a life together. As soon as she graduated, she had made the best of a bad situation when she didn't get into the same sorority as Kaylee, and she had become, the curator of the Instagram feed of Pi Phi, the sorority, which was a very big deal. And so she too was in this great place. Xana, the irony of Xana's death, because here was a young woman who was totally carefree, hadn't thought about the future, almost deliberately hadn't made any plans until she meets Ethan Chapin, falls in love, and for the first time that summer, when she goes and stays with the Chapin family, and she sees them all and they're playing golf and they're going out boating and they're having a great time, and she suddenly thinks, I do want a future. I want to grow old with Ethan. She opens a bank account. She starts to save money. She decorates her room for the first time. She shows this off to her best friend's mom. And so, to be cut down, having just made all these decisions, the tragic timing of that. And then you have Ethan Chapin, who was, this sort of popular, loved, athletic god, the kind of guy who's a leader without trying to be a leader, the guy everybody looks up to, but who's effortless about it, the kind of guy who has a smile and welcomes absolutely everybody into the room, and who, people described as the male version of Xana, totally charismatic, the eldest of triplets, and just somebody who was everybody's rock. These were 4 great, great kids. And, I hope people read the book and fall in love with them, as they deserve to be.
Brian Kohberger pleaded guilty in 2025 after initially trying to defend his innocence. He was sentenced in July to 4 life sentences for the deaths of Xana, Ethan, Kaylee and Maddie. He is not eligible for parole. In court, Dylan read out her victim impact statement. She said, "What he did shattered me in places I didn't know could break. I couldn't be alone. I had to sleep in my mum's bed because I was too terrified to close my eyes. Terrified that if I blinked, someone might be there. It's far beyond anxiety," she admitted. "It's my body reliving everything over and over again. My nervous system never got the message that it's over, and it won't let me forget what he did to them. People call me strong. They say I'm a survivor, but they don't see what my new reality looks like. They don't see the panic attacks, the hypervigilance, the exhaustion. Of Kohberger, Dylan said, he is a hollow vessel, something less than human, a body without empathy, without remorse. He chose destruction. He chose evil. He feels nothing. He tried to take everything from me, Dylan said, my friends, my safety, my identity, my future. When asked to explain his motive for the senseless killing of the 4 young students in court, Kohberger leaned forward in his chair and said into the microphone, "I respectfully decline." "Coward," someone from the crowd yelled at him. The judge said, though, no story he could tell would be believed or satisfactory. The prosecution said it would only allow him to create his own narrative. So while we all want to understand what would make someone do that, maybe it's better not to try and understand the mind of a killer, at least not on his terms. Thank you to Vicky for helping us tell this story. You can learn more about her book at the link in our show notes. If you liked this episode and want to hear more from guests like Vicky about these sorts of cases, send us an email at truecrime@mamamia.com.au. Please also leave us a rating and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts to let us know what you think of the show. True Crime Conversations is a Mamma Mia podcast, hosted by me, Claire Murphy, and produced by Tali Blackman, with audio designed by Jacob Round. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another True Crime Conversation. Oh, hey there, True Crime listeners. Claire Murphy here. 1 in 5 Australians experience a mental health condition every year, and yet so many people still suffer in silence. We know how powerful it can be to open up even just a little. So that's why we're sharing this episode from I Never Told You This, a series all about honest, raw conversations that remind us we're not alone in what we're feeling. It's a powerful listen, and if it resonates with you, there's more waiting over in the But Are You Happy podcast feed. This episode is brought to you by Medibank.
I'm Ashani Dante, host of But Are You Happy? Did you know that 1 in 5 Australians experience a mental health condition each year, yet too many suffer in silence? Talking about our feelings and experiences is one of the most powerful steps towards healing and knowing we're not alone. That's why we're introducing I Never Told You This, a series created to spark honest, meaningful conversations that support better mental well-being. Brought to you by Medibank.
I have anxiety myself. I don't even know what to do with it. Do you know how to deal with it? I feel like we don't really know how to deal with it. We just kind of get up and just seize the day. It doesn't matter how you're feeling. Soldier on.
2 people, 1 big reveal. I Never Told You This, a simple card game where 1 question could change everything. It starts light.
What small thing brings you joy?
I'm not going to answer that.
Then comes the moment that could shift a relationship forever as they finish this sentence.
I never told you this.
I've never told you this.
I never told you this.
Today, reality TV influencers, mother and daughter duo Mary and Martha Kalafidis will be sitting down together.
Quite nervous, but I'm always nervous.
Mary has something big to reveal to her daughter.
I don't think she's expecting me to say what I'm going to say. Welcome, Martha.
Oh, thanks for having me, Mary. This is a bit new for us.
I know. Welcome. So today we're going to play a little game with the Medibank family roast cards. Are you ready to play?
Yes, let's get into this game. I think we need a little game.
So who picks?
Maybe you go for it.
Oh, are you ready? Mm-hmm. Oh, what is the most ridiculous fashion trend you ever followed?
Those thick fabric belts that were like a boob tube and we'd wear them over the jeans. That has to be one of the ugliest things I ever did. I'm 5'2" and that made me 4'2".
I probably told you, but you wouldn't probably listen.
Here we go. She had to throw that one in my face.
Yeah, just saying, kid. Just saying.
All right, so I'll pick a card.
Oh.
What is something I do that grosses you out?
I don't think you do anything that...
I do not.
No.
That's right. Good answer, Mary.
What about me?
Oh, don't, because I can say so many things.
All right, bring it to the table.
Cutting your cuticles?
Well, that's just like meditation for me.
But you go and get that done, and then you like to do more and just keep cutting the cuticles.
Yeah, it must be a nervous thing.
It's definitely a nervous habit.
Okay, I'll take that.
All right, go next.
Oh, is that me? Oh, what do you think your most useless talent is? You got plenty of those.
I don't think I've got any. There's
you're
no
flawless.
time for uselessness in our family.
I agree.
What about how you start singing every single commercial song that's ever come on since like 1980 when the
1950s.
dinosaurs roamed the earth?
I'm going to pick the next card. Mm-hmm. I never told you this. When you went on reality TV, all these comments would come in on social media. It actually affected me, but I didn't want to show you that it was affecting me. All these comments that were coming in, and I'd be staying up till 3, 4 in the morning, and I didn't realise how toxic social media can be. I didn't know as a parent how I can comfort you.
No, I can totally understand how that would have affected you with the trolls on the internet. They think they know me, but you really know me, and so you were reading things that weren't true, and then that would be just endless cycle.
Now you're a parent, and I'm sure you would probably do the same.
Now that I'm a parent, I just want to protect him from everything.
Yeah. I could only imagine, and that's why I didn't want to burden you with, I've got anxiety, I can't sleep. I had shortness of breath, like I was thinking.
Oh, Mum, don't.
Yeah, but that's how it was.
I think to some degree I did have some idea because you did start acting really strange. I definitely think I know you were staying up really late looking at comments. And I remember just being to you like, don't worry about it, man, like it's fine. But I think at the time, I didn't want to show you either that it was affecting me. So I would just say, to you, like, it doesn't matter. But really, like, I would be in my room staying up reading the comments as well. So I have anxiety myself. I don't even know what to do with it. Do you know how to deal with it? I feel like we don't really know how to deal with it. We just kind of move on with the day and just keep the day going. But it doesn't mean that the anxiety goes away.
The rest of this episode of I Never Told You This, right after the break. What's something you wish you knew about your family? Get together and play the Medibank Family Roast to find out. It's the card game designed to get families connecting and talking. Because when the bonds of family are stronger, Australia is stronger. So get around the dinner table, a tasty conversation is about to be served. Search Medibank Family Roast. Live better with Medibank.
Thinking back, I should have just been more open and told you, like, you know what? It's normal to feel this way because I'm feeling this way.
Yeah, I think if we had done that, we probably would have been able to,
communicate,
unpack it and then just deal with it in the open instead of dealing with it separately in our own
different rooms. Yeah.
But that's very much what our family does. So we're not very good at revealing, which is strange because we're so open.
That's the
about
thing.
everything, bowel movements, everything. Because we've brought up to be like quite hard and like strong and tough.
Robotic. No, you can't do
that. Get over it.
Yeah.
Get up and just seize the day. It doesn't matter how you're feeling. Soldier on.
When I was growing up, our parents were very strict. They never showed emotion. They never,
I just find that hard to believe. Yaya is like the most softest, sweetest, gentlest, emotional, loving, caring.
She wasn't when we were growing up.
I just find it hard to believe.
Yeah. She was strict, get up,
see
do
what
your
old
jobs.
age does to you.
I know.
It really softens you.
It breaks you down.
Yeah, it breaks you down.
With like searching and being like my own little detective, I noticed that a lot of these comments weren't coming from young kids that were just being mean. These were from parents that had kids. How could you try and destroy someone else's child? People want kids to be kind, but they don't teach them the tools to be kind and not to bring other people down. Like kids are mean today. I hate that.
But they learn that from somewhere.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. The parents are the ones that need to actually change.
I kind of feel a bit sad for you in a way that you kind of dealt with that on your own.
That's what parents do. They try to protect, I think, their kids as much as they can, So if your son was dealing with anxiety, how would you help him?
Growing up, you always said, those that matter don't mind and those that mind don't matter. It doesn't really matter because who are these people to you? As long as, your friends, your family, the people that you care about, the opinions of others don't really matter.
That's good. At least you got something, stuck from
after all those years.
Yeah, it's not easy being a parent.
It's so not. It's the hardest thing ever. It's so not easy being a parent. I appreciate it.
Oh,
Thank you, Mary.
no worries. Anytime.
Yeah. And it's nice to know that you're human under all that. Yeah, it's nice to know that under all there is actually some flesh and blood. Well done. Fist pump.
Oh, is that something we do still?
This episode was brought to you by Medibank. Live better with Medibank. If this conversation brought up any strong feelings for you, don't forget there is help out there. Please see show notes for resources.